On the 27th of November 2006, in the city of Shibra El Hema, railway workers stumbled on something horrific: the skeletal remains of a youth, hidden in a tunnel beside the tracks. The bones looked old, long forgotten. Investigators quickly uncovered more remains, this time in the city of Alexandria. Another youth, it seemed, had been thrown into the path of an oncoming train. Just hours after that, in Tanta, near a group of abandoned water tanks, by yet another train line, a third victim was found, with their hands and feet bound. In total, 15 remains were found. All the victims were youths, and authorities knew that what they had stumbled upon wasn't just a series of isolated tragedies. They were just beginning to uncover one of the most terrifying crime sprees Egypt had ever known, and one that had been going on for years. Ramadan Abdel Rahim Mansour, better known as Al-Tabini, is one of the most horrific people I have ever covered. This case remains largely unknown, perhaps because of the sheer horror of his crimes is too much for many to face. Al-Tabini preyed on the most vulnerable, choosing victims that had no one to protect them and nowhere to hide. There are not many images available for this case, so you will see a bit more of me in this one. But before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you are new here, then please hit the subscribe button and consider following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Ramadan Abdel Rahim Mansour was born in 1980 in Tanta, Egypt. His family lived in poverty, and growing up, he was largely left to his own devices. He also had a slight learning disability, meaning he was slower at learning new things and more vulnerable. But due to the family struggles, there was no special treatment for Ramadan. Like countless others in the area, Ramadan grew up navigating the harsh realities of street life. While his father worked to provide for the family, Ramadan roamed the streets, begging, pickpocketing, and selling handkerchiefs to help the family get by. At the age of 12, his father told him it was time to find proper work, a common expectation for young males in that region. Ramadan eventually found a job in a coffee shop located near Cairo's train station. It was another city, but not too far from home. Again, this was common practice. The shop was owned by a man called Abdu Al-Tabini. Al-Tabini was a nickname, coming from the fact that he would often sleep on the back carriages of trains. Al-Tabini being slang for express train. The back carriage was often for luggage, and for the most part, no one would enter. But Tabini was a horrible man. He ruled over the train station's underworld like a tyrant, extorting money from street kids who worked or loitered in the area. Cairo's train station, with its constant flow of tourists and commuters, was a magnet for these street kids who were just trying to survive. Anyone who didn't pay Tabini's tax risked a brutal punishment or even death. Ramadan, despite being one of Tabini's workers, still had to pay tax. From the start, a portion of his small wage went straight into Tabini's pocket. Still, it was enough to survive and even send a little money back home. But 2 months in, everything changed. Tabini began demanding almost all of his wages. Ramadan was working long hours for scraps, barely able to get by. He stopped sending money home, and his family assumed he was wasting the money. This continued for 3 grueling months, until Ramadan snapped. He made a decision. It was dangerous, bold, and possibly life-threatening, but he was going to confront Tabini. One evening, 12-year-old Ramadan confronted Tabini. He wasn't alone. He brought a friend, hoping that strength in numbers would help. Ramadan said, "You stole my money. I want it back." At first, Tabini brushed him off, and then they began to argue. Then, in a sudden change of tone, he said, "Okay, Ramadan, I don't want to upset you. Come with me later to the back of the train, and I'll give you your money." His friend warned him not to go, but Ramadan, both determined and desperate, ignored the warning. Later that evening, Ramadan met Tabini at the train. They both sat on the back carriage, which was to be expected, but once the train began to move, Tabini's demeanour changed in an instant. He snapped, furious at being challenged. He began a brutal attack, viciously beating Ramadan. He could barely fight back. This was a grown man. And then it got worse. Tabini tied him up, using Ramadan's own clothes, then dragged him to the luggage rack at the top of the carriage, above the seats, and there he forced himself on Ramadan. When it was over, Ramadan lay limp and broken, but Tabini didn't care. He threw him from the top of the moving carriage, his small body crashing down onto the jagged rocks besides the tracks. Bleeding and battered, he somehow survived, though one of his eyes was permanently damaged and his neck and back were severely injured. Eventually, Ramadan was rescued and he stayed in a medical centre for a month where he received treatment. He felt shame and humiliation and began to feel hatred towards himself. He fell into a deep depression. When authorities asked him who had done this to him, Ramadan named his attacker, Abdul al-Tabini. Police arrested Tabini and held him in custody. Ramadan couldn't work. He spent the next few weeks recovering physically, but emotionally, something inside him had shifted forever. He was consumed by rage. Vengeance burned in him. He vowed that when Tabini got out, he would kill him. But he never got his chance. After just 1 month, Tabini was released due to lack of evidence. Days later, Tabini was hit by a car and killed. For many, that may have seemed like justice. Their nightmare was over. But for Ramadan, it wasn't enough. The man who had ruined him was gone, but so was his chance to get revenge. And that unfulfilled fury began to grow inside him. Once Ramadan had recovered from his injuries, he never returned to the coffee shop or to any kind of normal life. The youth who had once tried to stand up for himself was gone. In his place was someone harder, angrier. Instead of rebuilding, he joined a gang operating near Cairo train station, a group known for its brutality and lawlessness. Here, he learned more than just how to survive. He learned how to dominate, how to steal, and how to intimidate. The gang thrived on fear, and their weapon of choice was intimate assaults, used against anyone, male or female, anyone who stood in their way. Many of its members were addicts, driven by desperation and cruelty. For them, human dignity meant nothing. Ramadan adapted quickly. He rose through the ranks with ease, earning a reputation for being especially ruthless. The gang mostly preyed on street kids, the most vulnerable in society, and Ramadan, oddly enough, seemed to reserve a special kind of hatred for them. Perhaps it was because he saw his former self in their eyes, the weak, broken 12-year-old who never got his revenge. For years, the gang spread chaos like a plague. Hurting others became routine. But something snapped inside Ramadan. His rage turned inward towards his own crew. He didn't want to be a member of a gang no more. He felt he needed to be in power. He had a vision and wanted to earn more money and expand the criminal actions. So he split off, taking only his most loyal followers to form a new gang. Each member asked to pick a new name for themselves. Faraj Mahmood became Hantana, who was 17. Mohammed Abdulaziz, known as Al-Sawisi, who was also 17. Amid Samir Abdelmonim, known as Bakwa, who was 16. And finally, Hamad Maroof, known as Bazaar, and Ramadan. He chose the name that had haunted him since he was 12 years old, Ramadan al-Tabini. He claimed it like a crown, not to honour the man who had ruined his life, but to become something even darker, and to link his abuser to the atrocities he would commit. He wanted the name to strike fear, and like the original Tabini, he made the train lines his hunting grounds. The new gang was called the Tabinis. What began as a hunt for revenge had now twisted into something much worse. Ramadan had become the very thing he once swore to destroy. He was no longer a victim, he was the predator. Ramadan knew he and his gang lacked the strength to challenge rival criminals or larger, more powerful gangs, so he turned his focus to those who couldn't fight back, street kids. Vulnerable, isolated and forgotten, they were the perfect targets. He trained his crew to move like ghosts along the railway lines, teaching them how to leap from one carriage to another, skills that became critical, not just for committing crimes, but for disappearing when the authorities closed in. The railways weren't just transportation anymore, they were where the gang committed most of their crimes. Ramadan ruled with an iron fist, but left the daily operations to al-Swasi, his trusted right-hand man. Al-Swasi issued orders and enforced discipline, while Ramadan shaped the gang's overall vision and direction. Their first goal was recruitment, then domination. The targets were always youths between the ages of 7 and 13, no older, no younger. These youths were forced to pay a share of their daily earnings to the gang. If they paid, they lived. If they didn't, they suffered immensely. The gang's influence grew rapidly. Using railway lines as arteries, they extended their reach across Cairo, Alexandria, El Bahari, Garbia, Caliubia, and Beni Suef. Each night, the leaders gathered to count their extorted earnings. Then they got high and prepared to do it all over again the next day. But for those who resisted, those who couldn't pay or dared defy the gang, the punishment was beyond comprehension. The victims were dragged into the isolated back carriages of trains and brutalized, beaten, forced upon, and tortured. It wasn't just violence, it was sadism. They were slashed with razor blades, urinated on, and mutilated, dehumanized in every possible way. And when the gang was done with them, they were thrown either alive or dead onto opposite train tracks when a train was coming the opposite way. Sometimes, in acts of sheer cruelty, the gang would sever the limbs with a machete before tossing the youths in front of oncoming trains, adding to their suffering. Their bodies were often reduced to pulp, unrecognizable from the horrors they had endured to anyone who might come looking. And most times, no one ever did. But Ramadan's thirst only grew. Eventually, even the youths who had paid the gang's tax weren't safe. He began instructing his crew to target them anyway, but this time they would offer them hope before the horror. They promised paradise. "Come with us to Alexandria," they told them. "It's beautiful there. Everything is free. No more hunger. No more sleeping in the cold." To the youths who were living in fear and filth, this lie was irresistible. But once on the train, those youths were subjected to the gang's worst depravity. As I have mentioned before, the promises vanished. What remained was pain, abuse, and death. Some met different, miserable ends. The Tabini gang were known to bury victims alive or dump them in the River Nile. I suppose it was just whatever was more convenient at the time for them. This reign of terror lasted for 7 years. Officially, 35 victims were confirmed, but the real number could be much higher. Street kids disappeared regularly, and without families or anyone to report them missing, many simply vanished from the world. Authorities grew suspicious. The gang's movements were being tracked, but without bodies, without witnesses, without evidence. There was nothing they could do. The silence of the streets protected the Tabini gang. No one would dare speak out against them. Fear had become their greatest weapon. During this time, Ramadan met a young woman named Azabarbesh, a street vendor selling newspapers. For reasons I don't know, he took a liking to her, and they had a child together. He even forced her to take care of another child that had come into his life. But Azza's existence with him was far from a bed of roses. He forced her into selling her body and used her to lure in other female victims. When he wanted to force himself on a female, she was the one who found them. He controlled her entirely. Once she became pregnant again with Ramadan, and he forced her to get an abortion. Later, Ramadan would give one of the most vile insights into his view of women. He said, "You can only really get to know a woman when you're forcing yourself on her." Vile. In May 2003, the Tabini gang faced a rare threat: exposure. One of their members, named Fauzi, had been arrested. Though he was quickly released, the incident rattled Ramadan. He was enraged. Someone had broken their code of silence. Someone had talked. He demanded answers, and eventually one name kept popping up: Mohammed Kamal. He was just 12 years old. Why he gave Fauzi's name to the authorities is still unknown. Maybe he was attacked, maybe it was fear, or maybe he believed that justice might still exist. But for Ramadan, it didn't matter. Kamal had betrayed him, and betrayal demanded blood. Word soon reached the gang. Kamal was hiding in Shubra El Hema, and they found him, alone and defenseless. He was dragged to an abandoned railway tunnel, a place where no one could help him or hear his cries for help. There, he ordered his men to take turns forcing themselves on Kamal and also beat him. For 3 long hours, Kamal was brutalized. By the end, he was barely breathing. Then, Ramadan told his men to leave. Now alone with his victim, Ramadan picked up a large rock. He stood over the youth's broken body, raised it and smashed it down, again and again, until Kamal's skull was shattered. The tunnel floor was covered with blood and brain matter. What was left was no longer recognizable. When he returned to the others, his message was clear. "If any of you ever talk to the police," he warned, "this is what will happen to you." It wasn't just a murder, it was a message to everyone of what silence was worth. For years, the gang spread chaos like a plague. Destroying lives became routine. That is, until Ramadan turned on one of his own. In 2006, Ahmed Naji was just another lost soul, a street kid who joined the gang hoping for safety. But Ramadan saw no loyalty, only opportunity. He beat Ahmed and tried to intimately assault him, but Ahmed managed to escape. Alone and terrified, he knew he was a marked man, and it would only be a matter of time before he was found. With nowhere else to go, he turned to the authorities and told them everything. Ramadan was arrested and spent a month in prison before he was released due to lack of evidence. The officers knew who he was, but they just had nothing solid to prove it. And now, Ramadan's hatred had a new focus: Ahmed. But this time, Ramadan was patient. He let the trail go cold. If Ahmed died immediately, it would be too obvious. So he waited, and when the time was right, the gang would find him. During this time, a discovery was made by accident, but it would change everything in the case. While working along the railway lines, construction workers stumbled upon something grim beneath a disused tunnel: human skeletal remains. The authorities were called to the scene. It would later turn out to be the remains of Mohammed Kamal, which had been lying there for 3 years. But the horror didn't end there. As investigators expanded their search, they uncovered more remains, 2 more bodies, not far from where Kamal had been found, then more and more. Over the course of several days, 15 human remains were found, scattered across various stretches of rail, the same places ruled by the Tabini gang. Police knew this was no coincidence. This was something far bigger than a string of missing youths. It was organised, calculated, and they needed to act fast. Undercover officers were deployed across several cities, placed near train stations and alleyways, where street kids hustled for survival. Part of their mission was to protect these vulnerable youths from further harm, but the other part was more strategic. They needed eyes on the ground, hoping to catch whoever was behind the killings in the act, or at least flush them out. It didn't take long. One of the key members of the Tabini gang was apprehended in Shabra el-Hima. He was just 16 years old. His name was Ahmed Samir Abdel Monin, known on the streets as Bakwa. At first, Bakwa refused to speak. He was terrified that if he did, Tabini would find him and kill him. He told the authorities that they had to protect him, and if they did, he would tell them everything. Bakwa eventually spoke, and when he did, the case was blown wide open. He named names, he described the gang, he detailed the murders, and just like that, the net around the Tabini gang began to tighten. Whilst this was going on, the Tabini gang were unaware that they were being exposed. Ramadan felt now was the time to kidnap Ahmed, and so they did. They dragged him to the back of a train carriage, similar to the one where Ramadan had once been brutalized. There, they beat him, bound his hands and feet with his own clothes, and repeatedly forced themselves on him. This brutal act went on for hours. Ramadan wanted to make an example of him, an example of those who spoke. Even after this ordeal, Ramadan was still not through with him. The gang carried Ahmed's barely conscious body to a group of abandoned water towers. Ramadan hoisted him over his shoulder like cargo and started to climb the ladders. Some of the gang members were shouting for him to stop. Even they could see that this had gone too far, but Ramadan didn't care. At the top of the tower, 30 feet above the ground, he threw Ahmed over the edge. Bound and broken, he hit the ground and died instantly. Ramadan left him there, and because of the derelict location of the water towers, Ahmed's remains would not be found for some time. After the brutal murder of Mohammed Kamal, Ramadan gathered his gang and delivered a chilling warning. "This is what happens when you talk," he said. Then he turned to one of his most trusted men, El Sawasi, a figure seen by many as a leader within the Tabini gang. "We have unfinished business," he told him. Ramadan had discovered something that pushed his rage into a new territory. While he had been imprisoned for a month, El Sawasi had begun a romantic relationship with Azza, Ramadan's wife. Their marriage may never have been built on love, but to Ramadan, this was more than a betrayal. It was treason, a humiliation at the hands of someone he trusted most. Apparently, during his 1 month in prison, El Swasi had helped Azza get an abortion, and he also told her that he loved her. Tabini wanted El Swasi dead, but El Swasi sensed the danger and fled before Ramadan could act. Now on the run without protection, El Swasi resorted to the only life he knew. Just hours after fleeing the gang, he attempted to extort money from a street kid, but this time, he picked the wrong target. The youth he tried to extort was being monitored by undercover police. In a matter of hours after fleeing his own gang, El Swasi was arrested. Authorities now had something they'd been waiting for. A key figure in the Tabini gang. Someone who knew the full scope of the operation. Someone who had once stood by Ramadan's side. But also, someone who would benefit from seeing the end of this horrific crime spree. El Swasi didn't break easily, but once in custody, he made his terms clear. He would talk, but only if the authorities could protect him from Tabini. "He will kill me, He said, "No matter where I run, he'll kill me." Faced with the opportunity to bring down the gang's leader, the authorities agreed. El-Swassi confessed to participating in the murders of 8 youths across various cities and along the railway lines. But it was his testimony about Ramadan that truly shocked investigators. He claimed to have witnessed Ramadan urinate in the mouth of a dying youth before throwing him in front of a moving train. He didn't hold back. He told them everything, and it was enough. On November 27th, 2006, the net finally closed. Ramadan Abdel Rahim Mansour, aka Al-Tabini, was arrested at his mother's home. As he was taken away in handcuffs, his mother screamed in disbelief, "You've made a mistake. My son would never do such a thing." But it was no mistake. Over the following days, 11 members of the Tabini gang were taken into custody. While awaiting trial, Ramadan attempted one final act of vengeance. He tried to murder El-Swassi in prison, slashing his neck with a razor blade. But the attack failed, and Ramadan was immediately placed in solitary confinement. Ultimately, Ramadan was charged with 35 murders, but he only confessed to 23, though just 15 victims were ever officially recovered. Even so, he cooperated with the authorities to identify some of the remains. Most gang members pleaded guilty to their crimes. Some argued that they hadn't committed murder, only intimate assaults, but there was no sympathy in the court. As for Ramadan, he initially tried to plead insanity, claiming that a female jinn, which is a malicious spirit from Islamic folklore, had told him to commit the murders. That defense didn't hold. He eventually admitted to the killings. On June 20th, 2007, at the age of 27, Ramadan El-Tabini was sentenced to death by hanging, along with his lieutenant, Faraj Samir Mahmood, known as Hantana, aged 25. Both men were executed on December 6, 2010. The remaining gang members received prison sentences ranging from 3 to 40 years. The reign of terror that haunted Egypt's railway lines for nearly a decade was finally over, but the scars left behind in the hearts of families, survivors, and the nation remain. Ramadan's brother would later say that he did not believe that his brother could have committed all these crimes, as he was such a loving and peaceful man. It goes to show you really don't know what people are capable of, as these were some of the worst crimes I've covered. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.